Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Personnel and General Purposes. Just read through the usual chair's introduction. This is a public meeting and members of the public and press are permitted to report on the proceedings. Reporting includes filming, photography, making an audio recording and providing commentary on proceedings. Please note, this meeting is recorded and streamed live. These recordings are published on the relevant meeting page of the Council's website. By choosing to attend this public meeting, you are deemed to have given your consent to being filmed or recorded and for any footage to be broadcast or published. If the alarm sounds, the premises must be evacuated immediately. Do not spend time collecting personal belongings. All emergency escape routes are clearly signed. Once you've left the building, the assembly point is on the High Street opposite the Guildhall. Members and other speakers are reminded to use their microphone when speaking. Okay. Item 1, appointment of substitutes. Julian?
Chair, we've got no substitutes tonight, no apologies.
Thanks very much. Item 2, declarations of interest. No. Okay, thank you. 3, public participation. 4 minutes of the last meeting. Obviously, I wasn't present on that occasion, but for those of you who were, please feel free to shout if you have any queries or concerns. Yeah.
There's only a couple of us that were, and it's a very, very long time ago. I think it's fine.
Date on implementation. Shane, please.
Thank you, Chair. As stated, this is by way of an update in terms of preparations. Members will be aware from discussion at Council at the last occasion, we are charged with introducing some reforms in respect of the way that elections are managed, and the initial ones relate primarily to new duties around dealing with persons with disabilities. So there's a variety of ways in which we can do that, and just to deal with that one first, that primarily allows us to take further steps and introduce new policies and procedures as we wish. So it's opened up what opportunities there are for development with that. The second, which will be introduced for the coming elections as things stand, relates to voter identification regulations. And as members are aware, this means that voters will need to be bringing with them to the polling stations a means of identification, and there is a wide range, a list of alternatives which could be used for that purpose. Testing has suggested that around 98% of people will be able to provide at least one form of photographic identification in the lists. And for those who can't or are unable to, then they have the opportunity to apply for a voter authority certificate, and an online process will be established for that to happen. But we'll also put in arrangements for face-to-face or telephone support if needed in respect of those. It's not for me, obviously, to discuss the merits or demerits of this process, but merely to assure members that we are taking all the relevant steps to try and implement it and make sure that we're well prepared. There has been some consultation exercises, and that has led to some calls for this to be pushed back until after the May 2023 elections. But as things stand, we must assume that they are pressing ahead, and we've set out the range of activities which we're currently planning to take. Most at the moment, to be honest, is about just working with the networks that are available, getting the guidance from the Electoral Commission, and trying to understand what the national position will be. There is a national campaign of information to be brought forward, and we really need to work in parallel with that. Obviously, we don't want to be putting out mixed messages, so it's pretty much a case of waiting to see what comes through in respect of that, and then starting to put our own publicity and information around those models. In the meantime, we are reviewing the polling stations to make sure we have the necessary facilities if people need to go into a separate room to reveal their identity, or to put in place privacy screens if necessary, if we can't actually accommodate them in a separate room. And there is a wide range of training activities being put in place at the moment. We have additional funding which has enabled us to put additional poll clocks in place, so obviously if people do need to go to one side, then we don't leave the polling station vacant during that period, or close the polling station while we do those things. Paragraph 5.1 shows the levels of funding which we receive to implement these things. So it's really the basic purpose of the report is to assure members that we're well aware of the tasks that we need to do. We are waiting really on the government guidance, which will be coming forward in the new year, and we'll bring you further updates as we progress. If there are any questions, then I'm happy to pick them up now. Thank you.
Shane, thank you. Any questions or comment, please? Marjorie?
Have you done any calculations to see how many extra hours of work would be involved in processing and handing out the voter authority certificates? In other words, are you sure that one extra person for 2 months is enough?
Through you, Chair, there is a lot of detail to work through, Marjorie, certainly. We at the moment, you know, if the research is right, we understand that it'd be about 1,500 electors that potentially do not currently possess acceptable identification. So I think it's a case of seeing how it goes. I mean, there are additional resources being brought in, as you say, and yeah, it's a new world. We will start at that level and work within the resources that we have, the additional funding that we've had. And if we need to build that up, then we'll make provision to do that.
My question is just around the voter engagement on your action point number 5. Are you going to be, you said the importance about waiting for the national and meaning it lines up with that, which I do understand, but given the government isn't, and this is any government historically is notoriously bad at letting you have the guidance in enough time, is there a danger that you wait for the guidance and then it's hard to get those messages out? Or are there any plans to sort of develop an engagement strategy provisionally so that you're ready to go when you do know how you can align it with the national? Because it's not just about the people who don't have access to ID, it's the people who do have ID who will turn up at the polling station, have not brought it with them, be turned away, and are very unlikely, whichever way they vote, to turn around and make 2 efforts. It's hard enough to get voters out once, let alone trying to get them out twice. So I guess my question is more about the timing of that engagement, developing that engagement strategy, and my concerns about if you just wait for national government to try and align it, we might end up in really, really rush at the end.
Certainly through you, Chair, we meet as a team weekly, and every week we go through the various actions that we need to be putting in place, and that includes developing our communication plans as we go. And what I meant really in terms of waiting for government is that we need to make sure that what visuals we use and the information we put out, the wording we use, is in line with the government's wording. So otherwise we could end up with mixed messages and we're saying one thing to the public and then something comes out from central government which contradicts that or varies from it and causes confusion. So yes, we're working on bit by bit who our stakeholders are, who do we need to contact, what types of different information we're going to have to provide, whether it should be in different languages and so on and so forth. So all those building blocks are being put together. It's just waiting on the actual government's statements and their plan and strategy, so we know that what we're saying is in line with the government's approach. Okay.
Thank you. Yes, I mean, a number of questions. I mean, it's hard enough to get people to register to vote and actually to come out and vote without putting obstacles in their way. We really shouldn't be making it harder. So, yeah, you know, a lot of concern, I guess, you know, regarding the national legislation and how it's going to play out. Appreciate the assurance and work that is going on locally. Sorry. Yeah, a number of questions. So the kind of additional member of staff just for 2 months ahead of polling day, is that long enough? That doesn't sound like quite long enough to me. Is that all that is being allowed, or?
Through you, Chair, that's what the additional funding is allowing us to do. So we will have to assess whether or not we think that's the appropriate level, and if need be, then seek additional resources. You know, until we get some way along the line and a real understanding of exactly what's going to be involved in terms of preparation, then it's difficult to say. So that's our starting point, you know, given the resources we have available to us. And as I say, we'll build that up if we need to.
So at the moment, in terms of assessing our polling stations, whether they're big enough, going to be big enough for the confidential area, that's a piece of work that is still to come, is it? So do we have a feel for that?
But it's a piece of work that's currently underway. So we're going through each of the polling stations, and you know, some will be fairly straightforward in terms of that. So we're identifying those which are likely to cause us some issues, and then we will start to put in place a solution for each one of those. There is plenty of time to do that. I think we're okay. In terms of the actual physical structure, if we need to put screens in place, it's a relatively straightforward solution, and it is one that the Electoral Commission are providing guidance around. So yeah, I think we're working our way through that quite well.
I guess it's if the polling station needs to be in a different place, that causes confusion for people, if that is a risk, isn't it?
Yeah, through you, Chair, absolutely. We will not change the polling stations. They're designated polling stations, so we'll find a solution at each site. At the very worst, we would put perhaps a porter cabin in or something like that as an alternative if need be at the same location, but there's certainly no intention to move any of the polling stations at all.
It says in 4.65 that we don't know yet what data's to be collected. So is that secondary legislation still awaited, or is that now passed through en route?
Through you, Chair, that will follow. So at the moment, we don't know what data are going to be required. So that hasn't been set out yet in the legislation. So as often, that will follow on afterwards. Okay.
I mean, there are some aspects in terms of, you know, disability and local and access that, my question here, that are good things. I mean, I know that, you know, we have had disabled access. We've always had wheelchair access to our polling station. So what is new in this legislation that is different to previously?
Through you, Chair, it's not, all the legislation really does in respect of disabled access is allow us to use more flexibility than we had previously. So before, the sort of tools that you could use to support people with disabilities were prescribed, and now they're really opening up for us to make local decisions about. There are still minimum requirements in terms of the information and equipment that you should be providing, but we have simply, it's more permissive, the approach as it is now. So it gives us more opportunities to look at different ways of doing things.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, at the last meeting when this was aired, I had less concerns than some other people on this. When you hear that 98% of people have the relevant ID, and of course we know that 100% of people don't vote anyway, so potentially those people without ID, I don't know, I might potentially maybe less likely to vote. But even if normally we get a 30-odd%, 35% turnout, so 500 people are going to need to be processed for ID. Half an hour an application, it works out about 6 weeks on a 40-hour week, give or take. So over 2 months. So I think we've got time without additional resource. In terms of making people aware of the fact they need to take the ID, I think members need to take the responsibility. We're the ones who want to get elected. I think we should be doing the burden of that work as we campaign and knock people's doors, telling people, if you want to go and vote for me, please make sure you take your ID. Or if you're going to go and vote for someone else, don't forget you don't need your ID. But actually, I think you've got 35 additional helpers in members who are going to be out walking the streets, and then of course people who come and support us when we campaign as well. So you've got quite a big task force on your hand who are going to be going around telling people about these changes to voting, because they will be new for people.
But as long as we tell them, yeah.
And Jabba.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Not as optimistic as Chris on this, as you could probably imagine, but I mean, obviously members do have a role, but I mean, there's certain demographics in certain areas that potentially members aren't even able to reach behind. You know, some of those security doors, some of those hard to reach places in the city centre and other areas where, you know, you may get, you know, in the 4-year term that you're elected, you may get to see them once or twice. So, you know, those natural barriers do exist. People, plenty of rented property here and owners are away and on holiday, etc. So we are going to come across those problems. So that reaching out to those areas is going to be a significant issue for us. I mean, the whole premise of this is obviously to reduce voter fraud at the polling station, but I fear that it also opens up the opportunity for voter fraud and increasing it on the postal vote section. So, you know, with that legislation and enforcement needs to be just as robust, if not more, to protect us from those that wish to take advantage of the failings in that system.
And questions? From my perspective, when we spoke about this at council, I made a comment about, you know, trusting the electorate, and I think we should. But that said, I do acknowledge the fact that we do have challenges ahead of us. I'm confident that Shane and the team have them in place, and obviously we'll monitor them as members as we go forward. And clearly, this is it's a learning process, and there may be things that we learn from this that, you know, we're not anticipating at the moment. But overall, I think we're in a good place, and I'm content that come May, I think we'll be, you know, perhaps some members be pleasantly surprised. So on that, Lynn, yes.
A couple more questions, if I may, because, you know, it is the detail, it's the devil of the detail around this that is going to be so important. On the Appendix 1, we've got the provisions of the Act overall. The bottom one about digital imprints regime, is that one of the points of the Act that's already in place, or is it still to come? And to be absolutely honest, I don't really understand it.
Through you, Chair, I think this is one of the areas which will follow on. So
Right.
This won't apply for in May 23, but I will take that away and provide more updates in terms of that particular aspect of it. You know, obviously it needs a bit of clarifying in terms of the language which is used there, but it's not one that's going to immediately concern us, hence I haven't spoken to it in the report, but I will advise members more on that.
Thank you. So that's not one for this coming May. And then one last question. So in Appendix 2, we've got the list of different means of photographic ID that are acceptable. Is the young person's travel card one? Because certainly, you know, over the sort of social media, older person's bus pass is acceptable, but young person's isn't. Has that been updated? Is this actually that differential in place?
Through you, Chair, I'll have to check on that. The young person's, does that go up to 21? Or does it stop at 18, young person's?
I think it does, or student pass, I don't know. Yeah.
I'll have to check that one out. Okay.
Sean has just reminded me, and I'm grateful for that we'll meet again in March. So I'm happy to ask officers to provide an update in March, just so that we have a kind of running narrative of where we're going with this one. But obviously, in the meantime, please feel free to email in and request answers to whatever concerns you may have. So happy to note item 5. Okay, thanks very much. Okay, moving along to item 6, which is Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Strategy, and welcome to Richard Morris.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to introduce this item and Rich, my colleague, is going to support me if we have some questions, and then I want to just take you through the report and the progress update, and then I propose that we pause there for questions before we then look a little bit at the emerging census data, if that's okay to take it in that format. Members, I'm very pleased to bring you an update on the strategy. It's not something that this council has done from a governance point of view regularly in recent memory, sat as a committee and scrutinised our progress on equality, diversity, inclusion. So obviously when we did the piece of work and recognised that we needed a new strategy, we recognised that we needed governance oversight of that as well. So the strategy, as you recall, has been approved and adopted through the Policy and Resources Committee. 3-year strategy, targeted action plan in each year to keep us on track. It's the function of this committee to hold us to account, to check we're making progress. We're supported by a member champion for equality, diversity, inclusion, which is Councillor Robin Norfolk, and she's met with us as officers 3 times and helped to sort of check and challenge and steer some of our thought processes, and also act as an advocate for the strategy in the wider community. So, as I say, this is an information report to give you assurance that in the 9 months since we launched the strategy, we've been busy with the practical implementation. And the covering report gives you some bullet points which give you that sense, but Appendix 1 gives you the action plan, which walks you through 22 specific actions which are happening because of the strategy. So I would just distinguish that from the sort of business as usual equality, diversity and inclusion work that we might otherwise be doing as a council, because we do fund things, we do get involved in things, we always have done. But in terms of the progress we want to make to demonstrate that measurably we can say we're an excellent council, not just a good council, that's about getting into all the detail. And again, just to remind the committee, the Local Government Association framework, which we've used to create our strategy, has 4 strands, which we've called our excellence aims. So some of them look outwards and some of them look inwards: understanding and working with our communities, leadership, partnership and organisational commitment, responsive services and customer care, and a diverse and engaged workforce. So again, I'll just quickly give you some of the highlights of the work that we've been doing across those 4 strands. So first of all, we created and launched the strategy in an attractive print copy, thinking hard about the photos, the visuals, accessibility. Rich has got it translated for us in 4 languages. We've got it in different formats. We've had it scoped through the county councils. They have a sort of internal metric for measuring how accessible documents are. We've put it through that process too. We've launched it and we've written personally to 120 stakeholder organisations saying, please can we begin a 3-year conversation with you about the strategy? Because from my point of view, there's no producing a document and then saying that's done, it goes in the drawer. It's supposed to be a conversation. To support the idea of the conversation, we have a dedicated email address. It hasn't been bombarded, but we have had some inquiries. Rich has worked really hard on the website so that we have a real presence on the web, and we've just tried to make that feel accessible and, again, a two-way street, really. As I say, we've been lucky to have a member champion appointed who has also joined some networks and tried to link in with other member groups. At an officer level, there have been a number of opportunities for us to get more involved with local authority forums and share best practice. And I think it's interesting that we've seen from that a sort of cyclical behaviour of equality, diversity, inclusion, where even some of the larger councils are also still reviewing, realising that you can never afford to take your foot off the gas on what is a constantly evolving topic. And even so, some of the larger Mets talking to Rich and Robin and myself about how they're still thinking, they're starting again, they're doing something different. So that's been, I found that quite sort of cheering, really, in terms of the sort of process that we're all undertaking. We've been looking quite hard at diverse and engaged workforce, and it is something that members spoke about when the motion came forward. Councillor Denham and Councillor Mitchell both spoke about that, diverse and engaged workforce, representative of the communities we serve, and we have got work to do on that front, and we recognise that. We're, again, trying to start with tangible actions. We've been looking at our recruitment processes, what our potential barriers to recruitment are. So one of our actions for year 1 has been understanding barriers to recruitment, whether they be real or perceived, visible or invisible. We've been taking people to one side and helping them with their application forms is a practical example. We've been making sure that languages are available. We've got more work to do on that. We've been thinking about how we come across and where we're advertised. Rich has made the link again with job centres, which has led to an interesting conversation about disability employment, and again, moving us from what is become sort of standard practice in local authority recruitment, which is a disability confident employer, to is it disability excellent? Yeah, so again, you know, the world's moved on, and we should be trying to move on as well. So again, getting into the detail on that. Similarly, in relation to disabilities, we've been successful in securing government funding for a changing places toilet, which we want to put in the Cornmarket car park. And again, Rich did some work to scope with users where in the city they would want it, because again, we have a changing places toilet inside the Hive. If you're visiting the nighttime economy, that's not convenient, and it's not particularly relevant to your nighttime experience. And the Cornmarket and that side of town was identified as a good opportunity. So, and the Changing Places team, which is nationally funded, they've been really keen to work with councils and support councils, and that in itself has led to a really interesting little bit of training around standards that apply in the built environment. You know, what's covered by the building regs versus what you might try and do if you're being excellent, and with disabilities being so varied, some of them hidden, some of them visible, some of them dynamic, you know. So that's been an interesting starting point, and Rich and I have been, we've started to feed that into the council's thought process for capital projects. You know, what does inclusive by design really mean? And actually you have to be quite brave and challenge yourself, because if you just ask a question in a project meeting, is this inclusive? Somebody will say, well, yes. But then you need to get into, well, does it, you know, how would it work for the frail elderly or people with, you know, a visual impairment? How would it relate? If you're trying to create a play space that's exciting and dynamic for young people, is that mutually exclusive from something that's safe for people who have a mobility issue or a visual impairment? Trying to navigate all of that, there's a lot more to it than you might, well, I know these members wouldn't first think, I know you know that, but this is the whole thought process and why it is definitely, you know, as I say, a sort of three-year process. Also looking at the workforce side of things, we've been thinking about inclusive policies. And again, I'd suggest we've been catching up a little bit. It's quite normal to talk about a menopause policy. It's quite normal to recognise working carers, and the government have recognised working carers with proposed draft legislation, and they're improving rights for carers. And the government have got quite a progressive definition of carer, because, you know, that involves lots of things in life now, caring responsibilities. So again, this committee has supported a working carers policy. So there we are, and on the agenda tonight, thanks to Councillor Bissett, we'll be talking about a parental leave policy for councillors. So there's always the opportunity to look around outside of Worcester and see what else is going on, and just check and challenge yourself. That's been our experience to date. So again, more we need to do there, and more we need to do in relation to particular protected characteristics. And I'm not going to explore that in any particular detail tonight in a public debate, but I'm very, very happy if anyone wants to have a conversation with me about that, where we think we need to target more effort with particular protected characteristics. Very happy to follow that up and have that discussion. I think I probably covered everything except to say that you know, we recognised already that the Worcester show, I can't claim this as the council's success, I'm not intending to, but we recognised already that the Worcester show represented a certain demographic in Worcester, and we saw that when we put the photos together for the strategy. And actually this year, the Worcester show drew in a lot more people that perhaps hadn't come to the Worcester show before. And the council made a small contribution to that with some funding. So we're very pleased to see the diversity of offer at the Worcester show improve thanks to Worcester Mellor. So there's been lots of things that have happened as a result of the strategy being more something that's become common language in terms of the way that officers put together reports and think about decisions, questions that members are asking us at committee and so forth. We have a number of planned actions. This is only year one, and there's absolutely lots more to do even in year one. We want to be really clear what is our corporate approach to languages, because it's clear that we won't be translating routinely everything into lots of languages, and technology's moved on now, and Google Translate, and also the languages that people choose to use when they speak versus the written word, that's all very different as well. So again, our approach to corporate approach languages needs to be meaningful, but when we have a new community in the city, they need immediate access to languages. Rich has renewed our translation contracts and made sure that they're fit for purpose, which has been really helpful. And he's been working directly with our face-to-face contact centres in terms of 89 High Street, Trinity Street, to be able to deal with walk-ins and unexpected situations, whether they are Ukrainian or recently Mandarin. So, and the other thing that we wanted to talk about tonight, whilst we have the benefit of your input, members, was where we're going with training, member training. So shall I just finish and shall I just land on that note? So in terms of member training, I mean, clearly our strategy and our action plan, which committee signed off before, recognised that there was a renewed opportunity for officers and members in terms of general training on equality, diversity and inclusion. And in relation to training for officers, we're looking at that in a modular approach about what's required for everybody, what might be required for managers, what are we training on, because equality, diversity, inclusion is not, you know, there is so much diversity within that, it's got to be meaningful. In relation to members, we recognise that members wouldn't all want to sit through an e-learning module. That's only one way of learning, it's not that dynamic. We've been exploring member training, and again, Rich has been speaking to other networks about where they are, and we've had recommendations, we've talked to people, and we've been arriving at the conclusion that the local government associations paired up approach might be good for Worcester. And what they offer is an LGA colleague comes alongside, so it's peer-to-peer, comes alongside a councillor from another local authority, and they said they can offer us anyone from anywhere, or you know, slightly more, but yeah, there's lots of opportunity to bring in a councillor from elsewhere. As I said, we're very much learning that we're not going to hear from another council who thinks they've absolutely nailed this. This isn't the conversation that's going on. This is about comparing notes and sharing experiences. And I think that's the strength of the LGA, is that peer-to-peer sort of conversational approach. So again, we felt quite positive about the idea of bringing in the LGA. For members, obviously, it would be an optional session. Necessarily with your diaries, it would need to be an evening session. We think it would be helpful if it was face-to-face. We think we're looking at post-May. We would want to support that with some online modules as well, which we would try and make fun. And again, they would be optional. But we just really wanted to take your views at that point and take your feedback collectively. Sorry, I feel like I've done a lot of talking, but hopefully that's a summary of work in progress.
Questions or comment, members? Zoe.
Kick off again. It's interesting, when I became a councillor, I didn't think I was going to be really parochial about issues in my ward, and yet I find again and again that I am. It's really interesting and really positive what you're doing. Clearly, you can't, on a practical level, engage with all the different people in the communities, but have you done any engagement with people in communities, or is there an opportunity to? I guess the thing that's striking is me being very, very parochial is that I had a resident get in touch with me saying that she's in a wheelchair, she struggles just to navigate around Worcester, what can we do about it? And I was a bit sort of, I don't actually know where to signpost you to, and it would be really useful that there's potentially learning there from a resident which would really help. And is there a way that they could signpost somebody like that? Who would they talk to? Because they can talk to me, but I'm not actually the right person probably to be able to then operationalise it into how you would do something differently. And it just strikes me there are opportunities there of residents in Worcester actually helping us understand their particular needs from this whole myriad of disabilities, but then it almost becomes so huge that actually how do you get hold of that? So I don't know if that's a question or a comment or just a general observation.
We'll both have a crack at this one. We totally agree with you, and we've had these conversations. A long time ago, there was a disability access group, which was residents and visitor led. In more recent times, that's more turned into Accessible Worcester, which is an app and a website and a place you go if you know what to look for. We sat at licensing the other night and talked about mystery shopping and, you know, accessibility of taxis and things, and accessibility is like so complicated in terms of people's different requirements. There's got to be user information coming back in, because you would absolutely otherwise provide the wrong things. Specifically, there are people who want to sort of reinvigorate that access group within the city, and Rich has started that conversation. And we've also got something on our action plan about improving our stakeholder groups. So it's a terrible phrase, I think of another phrase, but people who want to talk to us. Because whether that's the people who care for children with disabilities who have different requirements than independent adults who have disabilities, whether those disabilities are physical, sensory, you know, mental, cognition, whatever. There's all sorts of different even issues to consider there. We see the need for a group and a conversation specifically, and we haven't got as far as we wanted to in year one on that, in truth. So we agree. In the very short term, if you'd like to put us in touch with her, we can try and be helpful about what's already available, because there is some advice and guidance out there, but it could be better. Sorry, that's a long.
Yeah, at the moment we're using Access Able to signpost people to the city centre and to public buildings, but yeah, there's a point there about whether people are actually accessing that app or not and know about it. So that's another kind of conversation we want to have with some of the community groups as well. We're also looking at doing bespoke access pages for events that we lay on for the Victorian Fair, for example. So yeah, it's something that's a work in progress at the moment, but the app is out there available, Access Able, which is for public buildings, shops, etc. But yeah, if you want to give us the details of that individual, we can try and help that person out immediately.
Thank you, I will do that, but it just struck me thinking that there is that, how do you get that engagement, and also how do you get that engagement from the people that you really need it to, and not, as we always know, the ones who want to come and join the group and shape things, where actually you just want to pick random people that use those services. Always a difficult question, but thank you.
I guess there's one question that kind of occurs to me, Sean, and that's, you speak about languages and how we engage with various parts of the community and so forth. And I understand totally there are practical difficulties that are involved here, but it's kind of important that we acknowledge and then do what we can to build on the successes that we've already achieved. I mean, clearly reaching out to various communities that are, really important that people feel that they are part of the city, and that when we engage with surveys or whatever it may be, that there's an opportunity for them to fill that in and feel that they're making a positive difference to what we do. So I guess in short, what realistically can we do more? Where can we take this?
Thank you, Chair. There's a point about when I sort of corporate approach to languages, there's understanding what are the key touch points of the relationship between a member of the public and the council that you want to influence, isn't there? So there's something about making sure that everyone feels annually that they can have their say and that they should have their say. I mean, our response rate for the resident survey, Shane tells me, compared to other councils, is pretty good. But it doesn't represent all communities and demographics. So that's a touch point during the year that the council really values from customers' point of view. They can choose to engage with us on a number of levels or choose not to engage with us, but they do need to be able to find information in relevant languages when they do want to engage with us. There are a few key documents that we should probably translate, like the city plan. There are others that Google Translate will do the job for you. When we look at the census data, you'll see in a minute, it's interesting, we still do have our top few languages, but then below that, then we have lots of people speaking lots of, we have small groups of people speaking lots of other languages, yeah. So we're going to have to be, as you said, practical about what are the key touch points with the council and the key messages, or if you like, documents that we want to make sure people feel they can access, ways in and points of access. We're lucky we have face-to-face contact centres. That gives us a really good opportunity. And then that needs to be our corporate approach, that we will make sure that those things don't fall through the gaps. And then that we have a responsive service. If somebody needs something quite bespoke, we're able to provide that. We do pay for these translation services, and they are very good, but clearly you can't necessarily, depending on your language and the complexity of your issue, you can't necessarily dial up someone who can immediately take the call and speak that particular language. So you have to have that call back and arrange an appointment sort of approach.
Yeah, I mean, well done. I mean, as the person who moved, the original motion to council about developing an equality and diversity inclusion strategy, or taking that forward, the journey that we've been on and the place that we've come to is absolutely superb. I think, officers have done a fantastic job, have fully embraced it to a much greater extent than probably I expected. And I think, using the LGA framework and toolkit has been absolutely invaluable, is the sense that I get, that it has been a structured approach and has helped identify the gaps. And it's easy to think, without that, as an organisation, oh yes, we're more or less okay, and we'd always put something, in papers about equality and diversity. Actually, to take it seriously and to take it on board, the complexity of what we're dealing with, and it is making a difference. It is, genuinely, making our services more inclusive. That we do now have a menopause policy for staff that has a significant impact. Absolutely brilliant. Well done. And I think some training for members is important. I think the logic of doing it after May, when we've got, that cohort of councillors at that time. And I think it is important that all members are up to speed with, what is current legislation and what we aspire to as a council as well. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. My only request on training is that we're not guinea pigs, so that whatever training we receive has been delivered before somewhere, so we can ask those people whether it was relevant and good, because training is always difficult to deliver, whether it's remotely or face-to-face, and some delivery agents are better than others. So yeah, that would be my only request.
Thank you, Chair. Just two things, one very minor. What is CPAS?
Apologies, that's my team. That's Corporate Policy and Strategy.
Which is part of...
The policy team, which is of my team.
All right, okay. The other thing is that when it comes to people with disabilities in the city, they're also affected by county council policies. And I'm thinking in particular of pavements and crossing the road and things like that. Is there any, are we talking to the county council about what they could be doing?
We've made the link with the County Council's Equality Officer, who's there at the present time, and we're having a helpful conversation. We have a good track record of working with the County Council on city centre priorities, don't we? Where if something can be identified and evidenced, then we can have the right conversations. I think for me, all of this is about getting into the practicalities. So if something emerges and we can provide evidence, then we can have a practical conversation. And I think we're lucky that we're in the city, we've got buildings in the city, a presence. We've talked about in the future how we'd like to get to the point where we do something like the Sustainability Summit. We do something like that for, I don't know whether we do equality because that's so broad, but do something that makes people feel welcome and they come and have the conversation with us. But, we need, so yes, we will work with the county, we will work with everybody, work with housing associations, whoever, but we ought to be looking for specific issues that need fixing. That's where I am. In terms of getting us from good to excellent, when we checked in, it was all about, have you done this? Are you doing that? And it was really practical.
Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to agree with the approach with the members' training, which is it's clearly we can't make this mandatory. And there are different opinions on some of these matters, which people are perfectly entitled to have. They may be ones I would agree with or disagree with, but it's, people are entitled to have a view on different issues in this space. And I certainly think we need to work with the willing, and encourage and provide. I think the peer-based approach is a good one. I think that's a very sensible approach and one I'd like to see. So hopefully that we continue to along that track, we'll win more. You win more. What do they say with sugar rather than vinegar? You win more converts that way. So I hope that's the approach that we continue to take in taking this forward.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to really commend officers and clearly your passion and understanding of how this works practically and all the different avenues that you're beginning to implement this and highlighting all the issues that are coming out of it. It just shows a real systems thinking approach of how you've, not just a tick box approach, you're trying to work out where and how this affects it. Some of that intelligence obviously comes from the community. For example, the Perryfields Community Association identified women swimming as an issue. Now we've got it up at Purdyswell. That's something that hasn't been present since Sansom Walk, whether that's the diversity at the Mella, whether that's the access routes our city councillors highlight in terms of the disability. There's a lot of areas that obviously that are yet to be uncovered, but really pleased with how the strategy has been adopted and the approach that you are taking, that actually it is reaping real benefits and practical solutions for the problems. Thank you.
Yeah, it's just briefly to follow up on what Marjorie said. As a county councillor, we have endeavoured to raise EDI standards within the county council. As an organisation, they're not in the same place as the city council. So there's some way to go. And I ask challenging questions reasonably frequently.
Yeah, sure, James. I'm just picking up on Councillor Bayliss' point in terms of, I understand the approach that we need to be is sensitive and members have their opinions, but it is also our job to challenge bigoted views and challenges views that aren't acceptable in modern day society, and that's our job to call those out as well.
Thank you, members. I mean, I think with your forbearance, I would just like Rich just to highlight a few key points emerging from the census before we move away from this item, because this is hot off the press, really. In fact, there's new census data sets coming out all the time. These are so new, we haven't had the chance to analyse them yet. But this is the first snapshot of what Worcester is looking like. And Rich, would you mind just giving us a few of the nuggets that come out of that?
Yes, and thank you, Chair. Yes, this presentation is just a bit of a touch base on the census, really. The data is so new, as Sian said, that we haven't had time to analyse it, and it's still coming out each day. So I've just really put in there some highlights to take your interest, and also if you want to start accessing some of that data yourselves, you can, because it's available in a map online, and it does drill down to the local authority area and some of the smaller areas within local authority as well. So basically, I just wanted to highlight that we are starting to look at this as it comes through. It's not all perfect in terms of comparing the last 10 years to this one, because the questions in some of the areas are slightly different. At the moment, we have population, sex and age, migration, UK armed forces and veterans, ethnic group, national identity, language and religion. Well, that was as when this was published last week anyway, and more has come out since then. So I just really wanted to highlight some of the main points that are on there. So as a city, we've now passed the 100,000 population from 98,800, and we're now 103,900. Some other, so our population grew less than England, which was 6.6%, and Worcester was 5.2%. And the median age is now 37 and is now 39, sorry, from the last one. And there's some other interesting statistics, again, not analysed yet. 87.2% of people in Worcester were born in the UK and 12.8% outside. And there's a bit of a breakdown there in terms of areas where that those populations have come from. In terms of UK armed forces and veterans, 3% of Worcester people have previously served in the UK's armed forces, 0.8 previously served in reserved, and 0.2 in both. And then, again, there's some more data. It's not all highlighted in here because it's broken down in such a way you'd have to go through spreadsheets and spreadsheets at this stage. But there's ethnic group, household language, main language, multiple ethnic groups, main languages in household, multiple religions, national identity detailed, proficiency in English and religion. So I've just sort of highlighted a few here because it might take your interest. But as I said, you can at the moment, and I'm doing it for officers, download the actual Excel data set so that we can start looking at them. But you can do this as well. This is all public information available on the census website, and you can filter out to our local authority. Ethnic groups in Worcester, 90% of people in Worcester identify as white. And then the other breakdowns, 5.6 identify as Asian or Asian British, 2.2 mixed or multiple, 1.2 black British, Caribbean or African, and 1% from any other. So there's just some, at the moment, some interesting stats coming out there. And we were talking about languages earlier in terms of the documentation that we might want to produce and what we might want to offer in terms of customer services. So there are actually 76 languages spoken in Worcester when I filtered through the different responses that came back. But I've given you a bit of a taster there in terms of the ones where there's over 100 people in the city speaking those languages, and you can see there at the very bottom there's Kurdish at 0.10, and then it moves up to the over 500 speakers at the scale. Malayalam, then Portuguese, Romanian, and Polish is our second most spoken language at 1.65%, and 92.23 people in Worcester's main English language is English. So that certainly has, at the time I've had briefly to look at this, certainly has changed in terms of what running order they go in from the 2011 census. And religion's another one that's changed. So in Worcester, they are more likely to be non-religious than the rest of England. So no religion in 2011 was 25.7. This isn't actually on the because I've been number crunching as we've been going along. So no religion in 2011 was 25.7. That's now up to 39.6. And that's the largest increase in terms of changes in religion. The next, Christianity, 63.7 in 2011. That's down to 48.9%. And the next change was Muslim, which was 2.9% in 2011. That's now 4.1. And comparing with England, we're slightly lower in terms of numbers of Muslims, and numbers of Christians, we're also slightly higher. So there's just some interesting highlights there at the moment. The data at the moment, I'm starting to save that in a space where all officers can access it, so that we're using that to inform some of the decisions we're making. But at this point in time, we can't use it outright because they haven't completed their publication. So hopefully by the end of January, we'll at least have all the data sets been dumped essentially. And after that, the ONS are going to start their next year of doing their analysis, and actually developing a tool which we'll be able to use, which will be able to break down our city in lots of different metrics. So yeah, it's just a bit of an introduction really to the census and some highlights. And if anybody's got any questions or wants any assistance with it, please do.
Thank you, that's fascinating. Chris?
Yeah, you sort of answered the question anyway. I was going to ask, lots of data, not all of it yet. When do we get to some of the so whats? As in, obviously I've already extrapolated one from there. Church of England needs to pull its socks up. The bishop's obviously getting relegated. Clearly if it's based on performance. But it will be interesting, obviously next year, as we start to be able to do some of the analysis of that and see what it means for the city, as opposed to just looking at it as numbers and graphs. But no, thank you. It is interesting. Thank you.
Any further comment or questions? Marjorie?
It is indeed very interesting. I was just a bit puzzled by page 33. where it says population, age, and then age and sex. And
We'll just catch up with you on that slide. What's the title of the slide?
the title is population, age, and sex. It looks as though the information is a bit garbled, because it's talking about the largest age group in 2021 in the middle row, and then in 2011 in the bottom row against age and sex. So I'm just quibbling, really, because I'm like that. But I was struggling to get my head around what was going on there.
Yeah, I apologise for that. That's actually the way the ONS laid it out when they published it. So
All right.
I've taken the data in the same order that they published it. That was actually they did helpfully when they first started giving us the data. They helpfully did like a profile page for Worcester, and so from that we could compare with our SIP for nearest neighbours, etc. So I apologise. I'll Worcesterise it a bit more next time. Thank you.
I just wanted to say thank you. I think it's really interesting. I think it's really well presented, and I found it very accessible for something that's clearly coming out and clearly live. You could just look at the graphs and understand it, and it's reassuring what Sean says, that it's going to be a while before we get the detailed analysis and the so what, but actually you're able to be pulling down enough of that actually it's already informing officer decisions and it's already guiding it. So we're already using the latest stuff. So I just wanted to say I think that's really useful, helpful. And please carry on. I have no desire to look at the Excel spreadsheets myself. I much prefer the nice synthesized version here.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, thank you for the information and for kicking us off with starting to look at it and to understand changes that may have occurred in the last 10 years. I mean, I think interesting one to pick out there is being an ageing population, an increase of nearly 26% in people aged over 65 is very significant, in terms of a workforce profile, access to leisure services, access to health services. There's some really, some interesting implications from there. And the other thing that's kind of occurred to me, whilst we've been talking, is that, I mean, the level of the data tools and analytical tools that are available now are quite different to what was available 10 years ago. So the potential to, look at it in more sophisticated ways and to sort of match it or link it with other data sets and sort of service user needs is going to be really interesting. Thank you.
I think the point's been covered really, that when we use data, we must use it meaningfully. So the so what question, it would be important to understand, are we looking at the prevalence of something across the city, like an ageing population? Do we need to know where the frail elderly communities are across the city for the purposes of refuse collection? Well, not in a demographic sense. We need to be responsive to calls and have a tailored approach. And we need to know that that's something that's prevalent across the whole city. But knowing the prevalence of all the different languages will be quite informative for sometimes for communications and who we're reaching and who we never hear from. So it must be done meaningfully, which is the point we make in the covering report, because otherwise, you could tie yourself up like the ONS and spend hours just exploring it. And it's got to be targeted around service planning. That's an area where we did the self-assessment, where this council came down quite low on our scoring about using demographic data to inform service planning. So this will be building a base position for us.
So can I ask that the committee is happy to approve, note both elements of the recommendation, please? Okay, thanks very much. Richard, thanks very much. Thank you. Yes. So we move to item 7, councillor parental leave policy. Sean.
Thank you, Chair. That's me again. Yes. So what we have here is a policy really just very much for discussion today. This is the first committee that this policy has come to. It hasn't had any socialisation before tonight, really. There are a number of councils who've adopted a councillor parental leave policy. It has its origins in a proposal from the Local Government Association Labour Group, but since then it's made its way into the Local Government Association discourse more generally and appears on their website more generally and has been adopted by councils of different political persuasions. What the policy attempts to do, I've attached a sample policy. What the policy attempts to do is provide a position statement, I think, and provide the opportunity for financial remuneration for somebody who may be on parental leave due to the happy occasion of becoming a parent whilst also being a counsellor. Good luck to them. The template policy obviously acknowledges that the law is the law, and the Local Government Act sets out requirements about councillor attendance at meetings. And so the policy doesn't try and change the legal framework. It is providing within a council. It's attempting to provide, as I say, a place of certainty that if you are planning parental leave, you can understand whether you're still going to receive an allowance, what will be expected of you in relation to sort of service, and so forth. So it's really addressing that principle in discrimination legislation about less favourable treatment arising as a result of. I mean, I guess being a lawyer, that's where, when I read it, I thought, what's it actually doing? And it's looking at that less favourable treatment. And the less favourable treatment might be accidental, but it's suggesting that this provides, as I say, a framework or a mechanism for a council that adopts it to say that a person going on parental leave will still be entitled to their allowance if they receive a special responsibility allowance for chairing a committee or being vice chair of a committee. It sets out some of those basic principles about no detriment. It cannot be enforced as an employment policy because councillors are not employees. So there are some things it just cannot do as a matter of law. So there's just really a question. I just bring it to members today. If it was something you wished to explore further, the recommendation is a delegation to go away and do a bit more work, because otherwise it would need to come to full council, for discussion in any event, because it's a policy that applies to councillors.
Okay, Mark and then Chris, please.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I think this is excellent, and I think it's something we should definitely ask officers to go away and do. It's a long time since I was in this position, but I was 29 when I got elected to this council, and my daughter was about a year old. My son hadn't been born, so it's certainly a policy that could have had an impact on my life a long time ago. I think that we should be aiming nationally to sort of normalise the arrangements around councillors. It's still a bizarre and odd thing that councillors are, in another way, around pensions. It's the only career, I think, these days where you don't accrue any sort of pensionable rights. It's a bizarre thing, and I recognise that actually it's my own party that legislated around this completely wrongly, in my view. But I think we should be doing everything we can to encourage, particularly younger people who need support, and the rights that we all enjoy in any other form of working life. So I would certainly endorse further work around this. And any lobbying work we can do to try and normalise what are pretty standard terms and conditions in almost all other aspects of life these days.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It sort of, without repeating what Councillor Bayliss has said, where do we run? And I don't think it's a risk, so that's the wrong word. But when do we become so close to an employee and I look at the gig economy type people where suddenly people say, well, actually, they're actually full employees, so they need to have leave, etc., etc. How close do we get to when we start introducing maternity leave, paternity leave, which I think are all great things, and it might encourage younger people to become councillors instead of all the old fossils like myself. But then someone will say, well, actually, I'm an employee, so now I want statutory leave, now I want a pension, or all the other stuff. How close is this sort of, what's the pushback we might get?
Thank you, Chair. I think that's a very fair question and an interesting legal question.
That's why I asked the lawyer.
Yeah, I want to say, well, that depends. I remember being involved in a case a number of years ago in a previous life, which related to whether foster carers had rights to be protected under sex discrimination legislation, and the tribunal distinguished those kind of sex-based rights and family rights from your employment status. But I don't disagree that there could be a point where a high court on a different day says you've accrued this, this and this, and therefore you're starting to look more and more like an employee. There's always been a really crucial sort of acid test in employment law that's distinguished office holders from employees, which is about direction and control. And I'm sure every councillor here tonight would be the first to tell me that they are not under the direction and control of, the organisation, which is, I mean, you know what I mean. From a legal point of view, the employer can direct and control, and the employer, who would be the employer in this instance. So I don't think this alone will create a difficulty, but I think that you're right, that at some point there could be a wider national discussion about, rights and benefits and the nature of the relationship. In that regard, I suspect where the law is at the moment, it would be closer to recognising that councillors are workers than employees. Workers have rights under legislation, which would include rights like this, but would fall short of full employment. So I think we'd still be pretty safe.
Major, I mean, under IR35, councillors would become employees pretty much on the basis of the time they work, the fact that they get work computers, etc. So it's an interesting debate, genuinely interesting.
Sorry, I don't know. I don't know how interesting. I find this thing really interesting. IR35 is the revenues tax question, but the revenue have always said that they would come up with their own framework for that test, which would be separate to the employment law test, and their test is more encompassing. And necessarily, I think that's perhaps in their interests, isn't it, to have a more encompassing test? And the test for an employee is still much more narrow under current law.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I mean, just like to obviously welcome the policy, and I mean, I remember back in 2016, I had my youngest child. She was ill in hospital, and my wife had to take some significant leave in terms of that, and I had to step down from the cabinet as a result of being having to manage my other children in terms of that. And if this policy, I suppose, had been in place that would have given me some reassurance as to whether I continued in that when circumstances improved. So really welcome it, and I understand the latest circumstances behind it from our previous colleague, Councillor Louise Griffiths, and her circumstances, and how difficult she found it having a child and then being pretty much demanded to be coming into meetings and having to take part and having to to vote on that basis. So completely brings the council into modern day, into the modern day and up to speed with all other legislation in other organisations.
Absolutely. I can only agree with everything I've heard around the table tonight. I think it's absolutely essential that being a councillor is something that is attractive, but also possible for people of all ages and all backgrounds. And that's not really the case today, but the more that we can do to ease it along the path towards a more modern setting, I would fully support. So thank you very much for that. Can I just therefore ask whether members are happy to approve the recommendation essentially, and further work should continue? Okay, thanks very much. Thank you. So we move to item 8, review of hybrid working policy.
Thank you, Chair. This report comes to this committee from the JCSE Committee, Joint Consultative and Safety Committee. So some members will recognise it from that committee where it was given a good airing. It's an HR policy essentially, and it's come to this committee with a recommendation that the policy attached to Appendix 1, which reflects some minor amendments, is now adopted for 3 years. So in other words, it becomes a mainstream policy within the council's HR toolbox. So the report notes that we had a hybrid policy introduced subsequent to the pandemic, and that we committed to that being a year 1 policy. In fact, this committee, P&GP, had a look at that when we first implemented it. It's built around a set of core principles, and it tries to strike the balance between, well, I'll start in a different place. It prioritises the council's business needs, but it recognises that with modern technology, it's possible to work flexibly from a number of bases, provided that business needs can be met. This council hasn't moved to a position where it sets no requirements at all about office time. Unlike some other councils, we've actually got some set requirements in there. We use this word majority of the time. And that word remains in the amended draft, which is in your pack. We have undertaken a staff survey, and we've looked for evidence of the impact of the policy and the ways of working in relation to customer feedback. It's in the absence of negative feedback in relation to customers as opposed to particular positive feedback. But I would say about customers is that looking through the granular responses we had 80 staff responses. And I know that when we met as JCSE committee, I shared the raw data, all those staff responses and all the free text responses. And members will recall, some members who were there will recall that some staff were making the point that it enabled them to take and manage more calls from customers. They could, and it's about how people organise their working weeks, I think. So there aren't many amendments being proposed to the policy because on the whole, it's been well received. 78% of staff think the principles are the right ones. 51% felt they were being implemented fairly effectively. There was more feedback there around consistency. And I think what we're keen to do is to avoid the two extremes in our policy of presenteeism and absenteeism. So we're sticking with this word majority, but we're making the point, on the one hand, we're making the point that that can be applied flexibly where it's not about coming in for the sake of coming in, it's about spending time with colleagues. But we've strengthened the point that it's about wider colleagues, it's not just immediate team, because the staff feedback, just picking up your word earlier, parochial, the staff feedback was often people thinking about their immediate team, whereas from management's point of view, it's about wider team working and the council's ability to pull those networks together whenever it needs it. So we've strengthened that point. We've also strengthened the point about this, because this is a policy that's operated by heads of service. We've also strengthened the point that heads of service can require that certain meetings are face-to-face. And that's been implied and understood, but it wasn't explicit in the policy and we thought it should be. So on the one hand, we've got a bit more of an understanding about when we say majority, how does that work? And on the other hand, we've just tightened up a couple of those points. So there aren't many changes. The changes, in fact, only relate to a couple of paragraphs of the policy overall, and we would recommend this for approval now as a sort of mainstream policy for the next 3 years.
Thank you. Comment?
Thank you. I mean, realise obviously the world of work has moved on and hybrid working has become the norm. But I mean, just giving you, I mean, just wanted to ask the question: have you ever thought of this, the effect of this on sort of from a member point of view? I mean, I remember pre-COVID, members being able to go down to the MAG, all the teams there, and visiting the communities, visiting to the communities team, having a chat with them, you know, picking up on a couple of issues and getting them to deal, then moving on to the economic development team, seeing how things were, then moving on to the planning team. And, you know, it will, you know, matter of a couple of hours, you've dealt with 6 or 7 probably community issues that from residents' point of view, got up to speed, said hello to the members, made those, sorry, to the employees and our staff, develop those relationships, and you know, you've done a really good, decent day's work, seen all the team in the MAG and at the various places in the offices, and you know, you've made that connection. That's all but disappeared, hasn't it? In terms of members being able to go down and being able to relate to our staff. Those opportunities have been lost. Will we be able to gain those back? And you know, will we ever have a full MAG on a day where members are able to come down?
Through you, Chair. Yes, there were absolutely, as you say, the MAG used to be invariably full every day pre-COVID. There are days now where you could come in and do exactly as you said, and meet most of the people you'd want to see. If you go to Trinity Street, there's always a housing team there. And similarly, there are always teams in the MAG, and the community engagement team are in nearly every day. Their work brings them in and out. So for a lot of people, flexible working involves going out and doing visits. The same for the ECDev team, being in the city centre. When you've done that, you wouldn't go home, you'd go back to the office a couple of hours. Same with building control. I was sitting with a building control colleague yesterday, because their base is the city centre, because they need to go out and do visits. So there's that natural gravity of being in the city centre that brings people into the buildings anyway. You know, we work in the city and our buildings are in the city, and we're lucky in that respect. If you wanted to make sure you'd seen everybody, it would these days be more prudent to give people the heads up. The policy would require people to be available for you to meet face to face, and you have management's assurance on that. And we want to that is explicit in the policy about face to face.
I mean, thank you for bringing it forward. Thank you for the review. I mean, I'm a member of the JCSC. No, it's been through that committee. I know you genuinely discussed it with staff and genuinely taken on board feedback, which is really creditable, you know, and I want to kind of put on record, you know, thank you to staff for working flexibly and in a hybrid way, and for keeping services going through difficult times. And thank you for the reassurance about face-to-face, because actually it was only on kind of, you know, rereading the covering paper for this evening that, yeah, councillor access, when we considered it at committee, I wasn't thinking of councillor access, but it is important, and I think, you know, councillor officer relations are important, and it kind of illustrated, you know, Zoe was elected this year and has never physically been to the MAG, and actually has, you know, she doesn't know who's there or who might be there, which, you know, is a huge shift from pre-COVID, let's face it. So I think, you know, we do need to be mindful about changed ways of working and changed relationships.
Thank you. If I just may respond to that as well. Through the lens of staff, it's important for staff development to work directly with members face to face. It is, and it's just, if you're in local government, you need to develop that skill, don't you? And actually, the survey showed how many new starters we've got, and it's really important to us as an organisation. It's very important to the managing director that we have that culture of coming in and seeing each other and meeting each other. It's really important. It's not, that's the position on the spectrum that this council has taken, not one extreme or the other, and certainly not saying, you know, just choose to come in when you need to. Team cohesion. And councillors must be included in that definition of team, because we're all working for the same council. When this is, you know, if this is approved, when this is promoted by the MD again in his Friday message, he will want to make the point that the feedback from councillors has been, we still value seeing you face to face. And I think it's about how we do that in a structured way, isn't it? So that we know when you want to be in, and then we make sure that we've organised the people you need to see, because I think that just works with diaries anyway. I think that's the best way of working. But as I say, the policy says, in fact, this point came up at a previous audit committee where audit said, what about those valuable conversations that happen in between meetings, and do people still see each other? And again, we gave the assurance that the policy says, you know, people are expected to come in, and when it's necessary for a meeting, the head of service says this is a face-to-face meeting and they are required. And I wanted to make sure that that policy is enforceable on that basis, so it is explicit.
Item 9, review of the whistleblowing policy. Michelle.
Thank you, Chair. Again, final item from me tonight. Again, this policy has been reviewed through committees already, so forgive the duplication, but this is fundamentally, primarily an HR policy, therefore it's at personal and general purposes recommended for adoption tonight. It was also reviewed by the audit committee because we've taken the opportunity in reviewing this policy to widen its scope out so that other people may blow the whistle using this policy other than employees or workers. And when it went through audit committee, it was taken alongside the council's anti-fraud and corruption policy, which is firmly a policy about financial irregularity. Whistleblowing, as we all know, has a slightly more kind of accessible definition. Whistleblowing in law is a very specific set of protected things. Blowing the whistle, if you want to be protected in law, you have to be a worker, and you have to be raising serious concerns that you have a genuine belief about in good faith. So there's some criteria there. But nevertheless, whistleblowing more generally should be recognised, and we acknowledge, having done a review, that a number of other councils have moved on to say people other than employees may wish to blow the whistle, and the council should have a route and a mechanism for them to do so. So it's been a routine review that's picked up those improvements. Specifically, the audit committee didn't have any recommended changes. The Joint Consultative and Safety Committee did, and I've made those changes in the amended draft, which is attached tonight. So it expanded the explanation of what might be whistleblowing and what might not, because we have a number of other routes. Referenced the managing director as another point of contact for whistleblowing, reference to another independent resource. Now that's the point where the report requests delegated authority, consultation with chair and vice chair, just to finesse whether that can be the designated independent person for standards or needs to be somebody else independent, because clearly there would be personal details going in that appendix then, so I need to just be sure on that. Again, helpful feedback from the JCSE committee about reference to other sources of advice and points of contact, including leader of the council, chairs of audit and governance and standards, council's member champion for equality, diversity, inclusion, etc. So we've added those into section 10, other sources of reference, and added reference to the fact, again from JCSE, that the council should take advice from expert independent sources where particularly sensitive or complex things are being raised, whether they be equality or other issues or complex financial issues or whatever, reference to independent expertise. So those changes have been made and the policy is recommended to you for approval with, as I say, that delegation to finalise and upload to the website in consultation with chair and vice chair.
It's just, it's nice to see all the, we had quite a long discussion at the, whatever it's called, JCSC or whatever, and it's really nice to see all those reflected in there. So that was just a thank you.
Very much. I'm not seeing anyone else who indicating they wish to speak. So would the committee just show its approval of the recommendation, please? Thank you very much. I'm not aware of any other business. So on that note, I will bid you a good night. Thank you for your time.